Hey everybody. I decided to turn on the camera for my final module of lectures this summer. And this video or this module of videos is going to be, partly me presenting research and then kind of a film festival. So you're going to see a playlist of videos that are really relevant to detecting emotions in others. So I'm calling it detecting emotions in others because I'm lumping together some things, but it's really going to be most closely tied to Ekman's chapter on lies and emotions. I also assigned for this module for you to read the conclusion and the afterword, and he's kind of talking about, the future and things like that, given the publication date of the book is the past now. And so some of the research I'm going to be presenting in this series of lectures is things that he was kind of calling for in, especially his afterword. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started on detecting emotions in others. All right, so when we're detecting emotions in other people, we're usually going to be, we're going to use verbal cues a lot. A lot of times people will say, oh, I'm sad, or I'm upset, or I'm angry. Sometimes people will tell you what their emotion is. But a lot of times we have to infer what their emotion is. And a lot of times we have to infer that from nonverbal cues. We have to figure out what they're feeling based on facial expressions and body posture and gestures. I always think about, I'm teaching this class and then I always teach lifespan development. Like that's something I teach every quarter. And I always think about toddlers when they are in like the one word stage or the two word stage. They don't have very many words available to them, and they certainly don't have access to their emotions. Like they're not going to describe their emotions very well. But even just things like whether they want to be fed or they want to be held or they want to be taken outside or, what is it they want? A lot of times parents have a single word. Maybe it's not even a real word. It's called jargon, where they have words like wah-wah or binky or banky, or a lot of words that sound very similar and tend to end with an E sound, right? But it's not that the parents necessarily know what the child is saying linguistically. They know what the child is saying because they're picking up on the gestures that accompany the one word or jargon word, the facial expressions, the body postures, and that conveys a lot of meaning. And that's important for emotions, right? There's a lot of meaning to be had in the gestures, facial expressions, and body postures. These are not necessarily things that are being done on purpose. And that's something that Ekman talks about a lot, that, our expressions of our emotions happen automatically. What takes effort is trying to mask them, right? Like that takes effort, but they tend to infuse our gestures, our facial expressions, and our body postures automatically. And sometimes we don't realize what we're putting out that other people might be picking up on. So among Westerners, at least, so this research that I'm relying on here has only been conducted so far, or at least published so far, among Westerners. But what we find is that people infer a lot from how you shake hands, right? A firm handshake is perceived as a person who's outgoing, who has an expressive personality, and it also conveys confidence. Right. So if you're a new person who I'm meeting for the first time and you have a firm handshake, I'm going to assume that you feel confident about yourself. I would like to add on, this is not part of the research, but as a person who's had my hand shaken by, I have a reasonably firm handshake. I don't have a typical like girl handshake. I have a regular firm handshake, but there are people who like squeeze even my hand. And I just would like to argue, kind of have man hands. So, I mean, I'm firm and strong hands. And it's like, sometimes I've had my little bones rubbed together by somebody who's trying. To me, it feels like dominance is what that feels like. So confidence, or you want to project confidence, right? Like it may or may not be pure confidence. It might be you're putting that on with your handshake. That's my interpretation. Gaze. Looking into each other's eyes is a sign of intimacy. I deliberately picked this celebrity couple because, of course, they're not together anymore. So, I mean, we can't necessarily always infer that people who are on the red carpet or who are being interviewed on TV and they gaze into each other's eyes are being sincere about that. It's possible that they're aware that if they want to show that they're a good, strong couple, then they'll gaze into each other's eyes. They'll look at the speaker intently while, their partner is speaking. And so it can be a put on. Like these are things you could do on purpose. But in natural situations, a couple who shares intimacy, and that couple could be romantic, that couple could be friendship, that couple could be, family relationship. When people gaze into each other's eyes, it's a way to convey intimacy. It's a way to, really understand what the other person's saying, show interest in them, those kinds of things. An averted glance. So on the left-hand side, we have a person who's looking straight at the camera. In a second, I'm going to define that as a stare. But on the right-hand side, you see that his eyes have shifted. That kind of averted glance is usually interpreted one of two ways. Submission. So I perceive maybe you just shook my hand too hard, and so I perceive you as trying to assert your dominance, and I look away because I'm showing my submissiveness. I'm not going to challenge you. I see, yes, you crushed my bones. I get it. So I'm not going to challenge you. It also can connote fear or sadness. So when a person gazes away, it may be them trying to avoid, sorry, I forgot to mute my phone. I always have to log in with it and then I forget to mute it. So it could be a way to avoid the gaze that would establish intimacy and show that the person is maybe feeling sad or feeling fearful, and they don't want the other person to notice that. So I don't want you looking in my eyes. I don't want you to pick up with that intimate cue of what I'm really feeling like. This last one is the stare. So you could either look at the guy on the left panel of the averted glance one, or you can look at this picture I got from The Office where, poor Steve Carell was always trying to assert his dominance. Staring is a way to assert dominance, right? Holding a person's gaze when they would rather look away, but they don't want to because that would show submission. So staring is this dominant behavior. So among Westerners, we use these kinds of behaviors sometimes on purpose. Sometimes we do it absentmindedly. We look away and we don't know that somebody else is going to infer that means I'm submissive or that I'm feeling sad or fearful. We do it sometimes completely unconsciously. Sometimes we do it on purpose. I think Steve Carell's character is doing it on purpose, trying to gin up that dominance, or person who crushes your hand in a handshake. I mean, a person who's honestly confident and is physically strong knows to moderate their handshake to the recipient. Right? They don't attempt to crush the hand of the person unless they're trying to assert, see, I am dominant, right? So these are sometimes things that we do on purpose. Sometimes we don't do them on purpose. So these are nonverbal cues that could be used in different ways. What about in writing, right? There are lots of times where we have to try and figure out the emotional state of someone else, and all we have is maybe a letter, or maybe you're reading a novel and the author is trying to convey the emotional state of the actor. Or maybe you just received a text from somebody who you've been dating or somebody who you work for or something like that, and you're trying to figure out what their emotional state is. Obviously, we don't have the richness that is the gestures, facial expression, voice tones, postures, all the things that we have in face-to-face communication in writing. So we have to rely on other things. What oftentimes happens is you have what the writer might think was a really clear emotion being conveyed, and the recipient detects it as ambiguous. It could go one of two ways. It could go maybe one of three ways. Like, what does this actually mean? You've probably had experiences where you've either received a text or a Snapchat or something, or maybe you saw something on social media that somebody posted and you actually conferred with other people, like, what do you think the writer meant by this, right? Like, what do you think this means? And that really shows you that a lot of times these things can be super ambiguous. Now, if you're trying to be a writer, you want to make sure that your novel is infused with the correct kind of emotion. So I found a writer's blog, and the person who runs the blog was arguing that, you as the writer can describe the body language of the actor or the character in the story, right? You could talk about them with being slumped shouldered or averting their gaze, or you can describe it in writing, right? A really helpful thing when you're writing is you can just name the emotion, right? You could say that the actor was feeling whatever they were feeling, right? That really helps the reader to figure it out. And then you can also pop into the thought process of the character and have them ruminate on whatever or think about whatever they're going to say next, and that helps to cue the reader in. So if you're an intentional writer who's trying to make sure that mass audience can figure out what you meant, these are some strategies that writers can use, right? But what about our electronic communications where we're trying to do it quickly? And a lot of times we think, I know this recipient well enough, I can be sarcastic in a text, or I can lay down an inside joke or something like that, and they'll know what I mean. So I thought I would share with you some research on detecting emotions in texts. A lot of us try to do kind of like what the novel writer might do and describe the emotion by using emoticons. So if I'm joking, I put the haha emoticon afterwards, or the LOL emoticon after what I said, right? And that might help the reader to know what I meant. So does it help? That's the question. So here's a study that was conducted in Helsinki, but for some reason it was in Spanish and all the participants were native Spanish speakers. So I'm not sure exactly. Maybe they went down to a Spanish-speaking country to collect the data. They weren't clear on the paper. Anyway, so this is the basic design of the study. They had texts, right? And the first text says, ¿Cómo estás? And so that means, how are you? And then the next text says, Me voy al Caribe. I'm going to the Caribbean. And then it's followed by an emoticon. For half of the participants, it's followed by, the negative. I've got them labeled backwards. Smiley faces are usually positive. I'm the one who created the boxes. So the negative valence should, sorry, you guys get to watch the back row of how to create your PowerPoints, right? I don't know how I did that. What a flake. I was so busy colorizing it. I was so busy trying to make sure that the blue and the red were the same color as the actual frames that I accidentally didn't pay attention to what the words said. It's really classic, isn't it? So let's fix that really quickly, pretend like that never happened, and back we go. And you know what? If we were in class, I would have just done the exact same thing. So here we are. There's the negative valence. Oh, I went the wrong way. There we go. And there's positive valence. Okay, that makes more sense. So half the participants saw, how are you? I'm going to the Caribbean, smiley face. And half of the participants saw, how are you? I'm going to the Caribbean, frowny face. And they had a series of these kinds of texts that they sent. So they had things like, they crashed my car, I was fired, my thesis was deleted, my boyfriend was going to break up with me, these were all negative messages. And then these on the right-hand side were the different negative emoticons, which I did not know a lot of these emoticons, and I might start using them. Like that upside down, that capital C, that looks like a serious frown. Anyway, then they had positive ones. They gave me a new car. They congratulated me at work. I handed in my thesis. I have a wonderful partner. So they had like positive texts and positive emoticons, as you see on the right. So they would see one of the two sentences, either positive or negative, followed by positive or negative emoticon. So imagine they're like, they crashed my car, smiley face. They congratulated me at work, frowny face. Right? So this is... Or they congratulated me at work, smiley face. Or they crashed my car, frowny face, right? So sometimes the emoticon was congruent with the message, and sometimes it was incongruent with the message. All right, so here's what they basically found. So we've got the congruent and the incongruent on the x-axis, right? So on the left are the congruent cases, and then we've got, within congruent, we've got negative messages being sent. In the congruent case, we got positive messages being sent. And of course, they're going to be followed by positive emoticons in the positive message with negative, unhappy emoticons in the negative message. Then we got the incongruent case where you've got a negative message followed by a positive emoticon, or a positive message followed by a negative emoticon. All right. And then the bars are representing how the participant judged the message. Did they think the sender was in a good mood or a bad mood when they sent that message? So what you can see is in the congruent cases, when it was a negative message followed by a negative emoticon, the recipients interpreted that the sender was in a bad mood. And when it was a positive message followed by a positive emoticon, you can see that they thought they were in a positive mood. So if you're going to use an emoticon and it's congruent with the message that's being sent, it reinforces the tone of the message. But here's the problem. A lot of times we use emoticons to let the reader know we were being sarcastic or joking, right? So we'll say something kind of negative and then we'll laugh afterwards. Haha, just kidding is what it's supposed to mean. But look what it does to the interpretation, right? We've got a negative message followed by a positive emoticon, we have more people assuming that the person was actually in a bad mood, right? So if you have that incongruent message, we assume you're in a bad mood. Here we have a positive message followed by a negative emoticon, really much more likely that we think the sender was in a bad mood. So it doesn't necessarily negate the negativity that might be, the tone. That's usually sarcasm is, I make a sort of self-deprecating joke, or I kind of poke at you a little bit joke, and then we follow with a smiley face, maybe a smiley face with the tongue hanging out. Just kidding. It doesn't really negate the negativity in the message like we hope it will. It causes, it's almost like equally likely. It is significant. This little asterisk up here means that it's significantly more likely that they'll assume that the sender's in a bad mood, but it's not that different. It's almost like as ambiguous as if you had just not even bothered putting the emoticon there. If you have a positive message followed by a negative emoticon, it absolutely does not correct the impression that you're positive. It doesn't, that makes great ambiguity and makes the person think that you're in a bad mood, even though what you sent was actually a positive message, but then you have this negative emoticon. So you might be joking, frowning after you say it. Like maybe you're trying to be modest, right? Like, I guess I'm going to have to pay that extra $1,000 on this new apartment that I'm going to rent that I love so much. Frowny face. Like, feel bad for me that I'm getting to move into this nice place and I can afford this extra amount. And, like you're trying to be fake modest. It comes off as not fake modest, but as you're in a bad mood. So our textbook, the little reading that I pulled out of a textbook and put into the module, kind of talks a little bit about how we use emoticons to try and correct this ambiguity. But it might not be our best strategy because it may actually just, when you're using emoticons that are incongruent with the message that you're sending, it might actually just make it as ambiguous as it was before. So I'm a huge emoticon person. So this really hit me hard when I saw this paper. I was like, no, I use the emoticon. I use a lot of jokes in my text messages and things. And so yeah, I was a little disappointed to find out that it doesn't help as much as you would think. So, okay, well, this is a good place to break. So let's go ahead and stop here. And in the next segment, we'll start talking about some sex differences in ability to detect emotions. All right, see you then.